Welcome to the Ollie Fall semester. It's an extra pleasure to welcome our members. You see them up on the screen who are attending in Great Barrington. We're delighted to have you with us and would like to take this opportunity to welcome our new members. This has been a remarkable period of enrollment for new members and for increased registration for the fall semester. And as far as I can remember, this one tops them all. If you have joined Ollie within the last 6 months, would you please raise your hand so that we can recognize you? We certainly welcome you, and we hope that you will join us as part of the many committees that actually get the work done, so that we can continue to offer great programs for an ever-growing membership. It also offers you the opportunity to get to know some very interesting and very pleasant people. We're very pleased to have you with us. We hope that many of our longtime members who are here will introduce themselves after class, and if you would have any questions, please contact them. I'd also like to ask the Ollie members of the Ollie Board of Directors who are here, who are taking this course, to please raise their hands. If you want to know more about what Ollie's all about, please contact them after class. During this course, our instructor, David Auerbach, is going to discuss 6 episodes from the 9-year period of 1936 to 45. And each in its own way proved to be significant and prophetic. David has lectured for us several times, and in each instance, his approach to presenting specific events has taken us beyond the simple telling of the tale into a fuller understanding of what actually took place during, before, and after the event. David received his LLD from Harvard Law School. He's a partner of the law firm of Pryor, Cashman, Sherman, and Flynn in New York. He's a lecturer at both the American History Club and the Harvard Club in New York, and he's part of the adjunct faculty at Williams College. David, I remember when my mother went to the movies on Friday nights and she collected dishes, which over a period of time evolved into a full set. You're carrying on the tradition by receiving another one of our Ollie mugs. I see that you've already made use of the mug. It's filled with water, and so we thank you. We thank you very deeply, and it's with great pleasure that I introduce David Auerbach.
Thank you very much. Welcome to all of you that I know from before, and I see many familiar faces. Welcome, Great Barrington. Good to have you aboard. Hope you can hear me and see me okay. And welcome to all of you who are new to this. The format that I use generally is to talk for about an hour or so, and then open it up to discussion, any comments, questions. You can throw things at me, anything you want at that point. But today's talk will be just a little bit more, because I'm going to give an opening introduction to the course. It reminds me of the time that the great writer Dostoevsky sent in a manuscript and received it back from the publisher, unpublished. Said, Mr. Dostoevsky, we're returning your manuscript. It's just a bit too long. We're returning crime, punishment, and redemption. I'll try not to make it so long. But what I'm going to do for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to try to paint a picture for you. It's a picture of this country as I saw it during my formative years. Well, why is that important for anybody other than me or my kids? It's important because these were formative years for our country as well. And as such, what happened to me then was, more often than not, a reflection of what was happening in the country around us, and as such affects all of us today. So when I was 8, the second Lewis versus Schmeling fight happened. It was much more than a prize fight, as we'll see today. The twin specters of National Socialism and American apartheid loomed large in our country, hovering over the 1936 and 1938 fights as the third fighter in the ring. Temporary break in the phenomenon of apartheid, which occurred during one short summer evening in 1938, June 22, proved to be a portent of things to come in our country, but these things were to come slowly, agonizingly over the next 7 decades. Well, next week, as a conservative isolationist Midwestern suburb reacted to the enveloping Nazi phenomenon during the mid-30s, I experienced related battles as a child. I couldn't understand why, but as isolationist sympathies took hold in the Midwest, a socialist pedagogue named Bosch remarkably survived in my ultra-conservative suburban school system. He focused my attention during my teen years on the anatomy of fascism and the growth of fascism through an articulate and prescient analysis by a professor at Williams College named Frederick L. Schumann. But my learning from Bosch was to come from far more than books. It's a startling set of developments. The reasons for Bosch's uncanny survival were ultimately revealed to me. They were developments that would significantly influence the rest of my life. Well, next down to baseball and the radio days in the heartland. During the heart of the Depression, we didn't have enough money to go to ball games. The average Joe didn't in those days, and nothing much has changed. Try to buy a box seat for the Red Sox in Fenway Park or Yankee Stadium for your family, and you know what I mean. Of course, in the Depression, for almost a decade afterwards, there's no television, so radio is our world. And baseball, as conveyed to us by radio, had a pronounced effect on the psyche of our cities. We're going to examine 2 of those cities, Cleveland, Ohio, and Brooklyn, New York, about as different as any 2 cities on the face of the map. And yet, they were the first 2 to break the color barrier in their respective leagues. Jackie Robinson, the National League, obviously, in Brooklyn, and Larry Doby in Cleveland. Same time. And each had baseball announcers whose voices were instantly recognizable and left an indelible imprint on the minds and spirit of their urban audiences, including myself during those trying times. I was 11 when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. I remember it as if it were yesterday, and I see a lot of you nodding your heads. I'm sure many of you can too. But why us? Why Japan? No one seems to know. We felt blindsided. We'll examine the phenomenon, starting with Commodore Perry's unannounced visit to a heretofore hidden set of feudal islands in 1858. The growth of the Meiji regime, known euphemistically as the Meiji Restoration, accompanied by the rapid growth of the Japanese Imperial Army and Imperial Navy during the latter half of the 19th century, early half of the 20th, and the subsequent evolution of a Japanese Monroe Doctrine in the Pacific. Pay particular attention to the significant role Versailles played in all of this in 1919, and to FDR's handling of the growing crisis in the 30s. Well, our 5th session, by the time we get to that 5th session, we're in the middle of the war. I was 14 when D-Day happened, an event that affected me deeply as I had a close relative who crash-landed behind German lines 7 miles behind Utah Beach and 4 hours ahead of the troops hitting Utah Beach. There he established a surgery under fire. Remarkably, he survived, become a legend, but known only among his fellow troops in the 101st Airborne. He never talked about it. Unheralded stories such as these proliferated during the war. They're not glorified in The Longest Day, that wonderful movie. The Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, every bit as vital in winning the war, and their impact back home was every bit as heart-wrenching. I was to bear witness firsthand. But there was a remarkable 21st century aftermath to this story, which we'll visit in our 5th session. Well, finally, I was 15 when the bomb dropped in Hiroshima. Like the rest of the country, I was totally aware of how sheer chance, lady luck if you will, had played a deciding role in that having happened at all. And our having the bomb and not Adolf Hitler, if he had gotten it, we might not be here talking about it today. In our sixth and final session, then, we'll take a look at the paths of two simultaneous journeys in the summer of 1939. One by Joachim von Ribbentrop to Moscow, the other by scientists Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner to the Great Laconic Bay on Long Island Sound in search of an elusive Albert Einstein. It was a quest that was almost abandoned. To learn how the outcome of these two journeys would significantly affect the fate of Western civilization, not only in the 20th century, but as we know it now. So, 6 perspectives, all formative for me growing up, all formative in the life of our country today. And now here's the first, Lewis versus Schmeling, boxing metaphor. In the early spring of 1954, a pale-complexioned man, giant of a man, dark bushy eyebrows, high cheekbones, prominent forehead, was threading his way through a maze in the Orthodox burial section of Mount Judah Cemetery in Queens, New York. The headstones constituting a labyrinth through which he was slowly wending his way were set so closely that it was difficult to navigate, and the excruciatingly narrow pathways around them made the task even more daunting. The graves had been constructed tightly out of necessity. Many Jewish immigrants from Austria-Hungary who came over at the turn of the century had nothing but the clothing in their bags, and they could barely scrape by. In this new world is hoped for golden Medina. Yet, securing a final resting place for their loved ones was a first priority, priming even material sustenance. Half a century later, the overgrown paths in and around their crowded gravesites reflected their poverty and their desperation. The grounds were hard to manipulate without a guide, and the visitor was soon joined by a caretaker of the small cemetery, a weazened little old man with a kippah, a skull cap. The usual visitor was seeking the grave of a man who in 1928 had nicknamed the visitor the Black Ulan of the Rhine, after Prussian lancers who were known as Ulans. It was a name he had fought under for 2 decades, while he was neither Prussian nor from anywhere near the Rhine, and certainly not a Ulan. The man buried in the grave he sought had died prematurely at the age of 43 in 1940. Joe Jacobs, known as Yussel the Muscle, was a character straight out of Damon Runyon. Jacobs is also one of the most colorful and one of the most brilliant fight managers of the Depression era, the originator of a number of aphorisms, which have become part of our vernacular. Among them, "I should have stood in bed." "We was robbed." The unlikely duo finally arrived at a grave identified only by a flat stone marker, already sinking into the ground bearing the decedent's name, dates of birth and death in Hebrew and English. The caretaker bent over the little marker and began to speak in hushed tones. "Joe," he said, "who's a friend of yours? It's Max Schmeling. He came from Germany, wants to visit you. His first job, Joe, was to see you." The relationship between Max Schmeling and Joe Jacobs was an anomaly. Jacobs, the son of an immigrant Hungarian Jewish tailor raised in Hell's Kitchen, had become the closest professional associate, inseparable companion of a man who was to become the heroic symbol of the most dreaded and destructive anti-Semitic Closet in history of man. So close had Jacobs in fact become that his enforced absence from Schmeling's corner on June 22, 1938, during his second Lewis fight, caused Schmeling for the first and only time in his life, according to his autobiography, to become nervous. Typically, Jacobs had been banned from Schmeling's dressing room for a stunt. The New York State Boxing Commission wasn't too happy about the fact that he had arranged a photo shoot of his bartender client, a 5'2", 290-pound barroom brawler, affectionately dubbed Two-Ton Tony Galento, standing in the center of a boxing ring, holding a large mug of beer next to a keg of beer in one hand and a cigar in the other. The German Ministry of Sport had insisted that Schmeling once and for all rid himself of his Jewish manager, the omnipresent Havana cigar. Increasingly popular, Schmeling kept Jacobs on staff, despite continuing demands by the German Ministry of Sport. This gesture of defiance almost cost Schmeling his life. The Ministry of Sport, angered at this, made sure that Schmeling was volunteered, although he was over age, for the German Paratroop Corps. He parachuted into Crete in battle, and there re-injured a vertebrae. He'd severely injured in the Second Lewis fight, almost died. However, in 1935, Hitler and Goebbels needed Schmeling. He wouldn't get rid of his Jewish manager, but they needed him. What did they need him for? Well, they wanted the United States team to participate in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. The United States team was wavering about that. Schmeling came over as an ambassador of goodwill. Schmeling complied, like the good soldier Schweik, commands of Hitler and Goebbels. The American team, as you know, went. It was great Jesse Owens' performance there. But Jacobs stayed on. Complexity surrounding the unlikely relationship between these two paralleled the serpentine career paths, both Joe Louis and Max Schmeling. Destiny would eventually propel the two of them into the most highly charged, politically explosive prize fight of the 20th century before 80,000 fans tightly jammed into Yankee Stadium. Millions more tuned in on radio worldwide. Among the tuners was a sleepy-eyed young 8-year-old in Cleveland, Ohio, who had smuggled the Zenith portable radio into his bed and was hiding it under the covers. As announcer Harry Ballow took to the ring microphone to introduce an unending parade of celebrities, starting with Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney. Clem McCarthy, popular horse race announcer with a gravelly voice, sat ringside chafing at the bit, like horses at the starting gate. Began a slow, blow-by-blow description of the fight. My eyes were beginning to close. Let's back up a bit and trace the extraordinarily devious and diverse career paths of Louis and Schmeling that led to the fateful 124 seconds that followed. Max Siegfried Adolf Otto Schmeling. Born in 1905 in a small town called Kleine Lückau. It was just south of Berlin. 9 years before Joe Louis Barrow first saw the light of day in a sharecropper's cabin in the Buckaloo Mountains of east central Alabama. Schmeling, like Louis, would soon determine that he was cut out not to be a student, but something else. So the parallels stop there. Max left school early, as did Louis. He finally appeared as a strongman in the circus after trying advertising and pipe fitting. None of these seemed to suit him. But he soon took an interest in what had been the underground sport of boxing. It had just been legitimized in Germany. It was right after the First World War. The prisoners of war, German POWs, came back from England where they'd fallen in love with boxing. And they insisted, politically, it became necessary to make the sport legal. Well, Schmeling came to regard boxing as an art form. And as he assiduously studied the fundamentals, he began to develop a distinctive style of his own. In the ring, he was the antithesis of Jake LaMotta, the Raging Bull. You may remember that movie. He worked deliberately, almost scientifically. Raging Bull would go in there and all arms flailing with no defense. But Schmeling was very, very careful. Bide his time, wait for openings, and then he would lash out like lightning, one of the most devastating fights in boxing history. He won 9 of his first 10 fights, but was destitute, living hand-to-mouth when he successfully fought a 2-round exhibition against, of all people, Jack Dempsey, who acquitted himself quite well. Success followed success. Schmeling, now managed by a German named Arthur Bülow, whom he later had many disputes, won the German light heavyweight championship, European light heavyweight championship in 26, German heavyweight championship in 28. America was the logical next step. He arrived in America with Bülow and was soon forgotten. Bülow didn't know how to really keep him before the public. But he was out in Summit, New Jersey training one day when Jacobs appeared to see another boxer. Latched on to Schmeling. From that point on, Bülow was edged out, and Schmeling and Jacobs were inseparable. Under Jacobs, Schmeling proceeded to knock out 3 ranked heavyweight contenders in a dispirited Weimar Republic. Mind you, this was in the late 20s, early 30s. Sensing that a German might now ascend to the world heavyweight crown, some point finally had something to cheer about. Schmeling had become a national hero during the last depressing years of the Weimar regime. He was almost single-handedly helping to restore German pride in physical prowess. It was a national characteristic which was virtually dormant following Versailles in 1919 and the French occupation of Rhineland in 1922. Ominously, Schmeling's impact on the national psyche was a development which did not go unnoticed by a rising young psychopath named Adolf Hitler. After a hiatus of almost a year, Jacobs was able to schedule a fight for the heavyweight championship of the world with the then champion Jack Sharkey. The fight took place in Yankee Stadium June 6, 1930, for a crowd of 80,000. Took on a distinctly international flavor. Now this is beginning to leak into boxing. Schmeling wore the German national colors, and a crowd heavily dotted with German Americans, German luminaries such as Marlene Dietrich, Ernst Lubitsch, cheered at the top of their lungs when the black Ulan of the Rhine was introduced as the fighting son of the fatherland. Sharkey, on his part, trotted around the ring draped in an American flag. The fight ended indecisively. Sharkey was ahead on points, doing well, but in the fourth round, Sharkey changed tactics. He'd been concentrating on the head, he suddenly went for the body, and as his blows landed, Max felt stabbing pain throughout his body. Legs buckled and went down, momentarily paralyzed. Jacobs screamed at him to stay down, stay down, stay down. When the count ended, Jacobs leaped into the ring shouting foul. The fuddled judges didn't know what to do. They finally awarded him the World Heavyweight Championship while he was lying on the ground. The crowd had just the reaction you did. There were cheers and catcalls, even when he went back to Germany. The German boxing public jeered him. He had to give him a rematch, which he eventually did. The rules changed after that. Nobody could win a World Heavyweight Championship or any other championship in boxing while lying on the ground. Well, Weimar had its hero. But the embarrassment of winning on a foul continued to follow Schmeling wherever he went. Finally, later, he agreed to a rematch with Sharkey. He lost that on a decision for 70,000 fight fans in a long, dull fight on June 21, 1932, after which point our friend Jacobs ran into the ring yelling, "We was robbed." Schmeling lost the crown, and Schmeling and Sharkey never fought again. January 1933, however, just as Hitler ascended to power, things began to change. As Max signed to fight Max Baer, a new element was introduced into the ring: ethnicity and racism. Max Baer was a big hulking clown who didn't really know his own strength. Frankie Campbell, one of his opponents, had died in the ring. From that point on, Baer was disconcerted in the ring, fearful of another death, often stopping in the middle of a bout to wave at friends while other boxers punched away at him like a punching bag. That was Max Baer. The self-deprecating Baer once said of himself, "I've got $1 million body and a 10-cent brain." At one point he did. He sold more than 100% of himself to investors, figuring he could sell 1,000%. Why not? The very confused Max Baer also thought of himself as Jewish. He wasn't. At one point, he claimed his father was Jewish, so he was half Jewish. Well, the reporters traced that down. They found his father was a pig farmer in California, hardly a Jewish profession. But in the 20s and early 30s, when Jewish lightweights and middleweights like Barney Ross and Eddie Leonard dominated the lower weight classes, the press and the public were clamoring to see if they could find a Jewish heavyweight championship. So the obliging but definitely uncircumcised Max Baer donned boxing trunks prominently sporting a large Jewish star. And it was in these trunks that he fought the Black Ulan of the Rhine in New York on June 8, 1933. What do you think happened? The mercurial rise of Hitler and the Maccabean-like gestures by Baer attracted a crowd of 60,000 as Baer proceeded to knock out Max Schmeling in the 10th round. Now, prior to this, Max had fought as a German national. But overnight, Schmeling's defeat by the ersatz Jew Max Baer became a symbol of hope to the Jewish community, as irreversible havoc was going on now in Germany, accelerating. Now the Nazi propaganda machine launched full throttle into an attack on an alleged international Jewish conspiracy to undermine Schmeling. Why Schmeling lost to an ersatz Jew? That's easy, argued Goebbels' propaganda machine. There's an international Jewish conspiracy to undermine Schmeling. The key player, of course, was his manager, Joe Jacobs. But Schmeling was still the best fighter in Germany. So Schmeling and his new bride, Czech film star Annie Andra, were welcomed by the Fuhrer and Goebbels and treated as honored celebrities in visits to the Reichskanzlei. Although he never joined the Nazi Party, Schmeling had allowed himself to become a poster boy for the new Nazi regime. It was a Germany he envisioned as a nation reborn, rising from the ashes under the leadership of the Fuhrer. Schmeling's relationship with the new regime continued to blossom even after his subsequent loss to a fellow named Steve Hamas, a former Penn State football star, in February 1934. Nazi press again blamed Jacobs and insisted that Schmeling, once and for all, jettisoned his Jewish manager, returned to Germany to fight. Schmeling accommodated only one of these requests. He steadfastly refused to fire Jacobs. But he did return to Germany and now began a mercurial rise. Out of the ashes, knocked out the European heavyweight champion in the 9th round for 100,000 cheering fans in Hamburg on August 26, 1934. Now Schmeling's own rise from the ashes had begun. The next stop was the rematch with this fellow Steve Hamas, the Penn State football player, this time in Hamburg. The fight took place in the Hanseaten Hall, 25,000-seat indoor arena reconstructed by the Nazi Party just from a timber warehouse just in time for the Schmeling fight for that occasion. Hamas, who'd injured his arm in training, bravely refused to cancel the bout. It was a lopsided match. And it was finally over. It was exhausted in the 9th round. The crowd burst into song. Schmeling was back. Germany was back. Poor Jacobs was caught with a cigar at all in the middle of the ring. Didn't know what to do. All these Nazis were saluting. As the crowd broke into Deutschland über alles, he raised his cigar in a mock salute and winked at Schmeling. The Nazi press came down very strong on this and insisted that Schmeling, once and for all, get rid of his Jewish manager. When the waiters and the delicatessen Texans on Broadway saw this picture, however, they vowed to slip a Mickey Finn in Jacob's matzo ball soup. Celebrations in Germany went on long into the night. Trevor Wignall of the London Daily Express, ringside, vividly described the scene. Quote, German men with their eyes tight closed and singing their hearts out. German women with their hands clutched to their breasts as though in dedication. Thousands of men in uniforms, stiff as ramrods with their white right palms upraised. This was the soul of a nation breathing out its aspirations. Germany overall, and then prophetically, I've had all I want of war. Never again do I want to climb into a uniform. But if the screaming and cheering continue in Germany, I may have to, and so may you. Quote. An ocean away and culture apart, Joe Louis Barrow was mounting a comeback, one that had already revolutionized the American boxing world and would set him on a fatal collision course with the black U-line of the Rhine. Joe Louis Barrow, born in sharecropper's cabin, seventh of 8 children of Monroe Barrow and Lily Lease Barrow, both large people. Father Munn, as he was called, was committed to an insane asylum when Joe was only 2, erroneously presumed dead, so his mother Lily remarried, and she remarried a widower by the name of Pat Brooks, who had an even larger brood of children than Lily. They were desperately poor, and the family soon joined the hordes of people migrating to Detroit to go to work in the Ford Motor factories. Early in the late and mid-20s and early 30s, Ford, as you know, had revolutionized the assembly line. There was now a room for many unskilled laborers on the assembly line, and they went up there in droves. Here for the first time, Joe Louis experienced electric lights, flush toilets. And for the first time, he began to go to school. He stammered and was somewhat backward, reticent in school. At the age of 14, they sent him to a cabinet making school, figuring he had big hands. But his hands, he figured, were too big for making cabinets, and also for the violin his mother had brought him. And the 50 cents she gave him for violin lessons, you know where that went. It went into boxing lessons. Joe had his first amateur fight in 32, fought a guy who was knocked down 7 times. The fellow that beat him went on to the American Olympic Committee, and Joe left boxing. But he returned very shortly with a vengeance and won his first 13 amateur fights by knockout. Put things in perspective. By the time Joe Louis had his first amateur bout, Max Schmeling had done the following. Won the European Light Heavyweight Championship, defended it twice, won the German heavyweight crown, relinquished it, won the world heavyweight title on an alleged foul by Sharkey, and lost it to Sharkey in a rematch. Socially, Schmeling had already become the darling of the Weimar Republic and later of the so-called Nazi intellectual and artistic elites. He was a cocktail party favorite in Berlin. Joe Louis had trouble writing anything but his own name. But all this is about to change dramatically. After the loss to Max Baer, Schmeling began an extraordinary comeback as a very young Joe Louis, who now began a meteoric rise through the ranks of American fighters. Both would become legends in the next 2 years before their first fatal clash in Yankee Stadium, that one in August 1936. Louis' rise began when John Roxborough and Julian Black, who were numbers racket kingpins in Detroit, took an interest in him and paired him with the finest black trainer of the time, a fellow by the name of Chappie Blackburn. Roxborough and Black, because of their unsavory connections in the Detroit underworld, were probably the only people who could have protected Louis from the fate that awaited all Negro boxers in this country at the time, following the disastrous heavyweight championship of Jack Johnson 2 decades later. The America of the early 30s was deeply divided along racial lines. Lynch mobs were still common in the South. It was an America shattered by the Depression, and urban black communities had become pest holes of poverty. Most known sports writers of the time referred to Negro boxers as products of the African jungle. Animalistic, predatory. It was common knowledge in the fight world that Negro fighters were expected to throw fights on command. As a result, the fight game was at its lowest ebb ever. Fights were understood to be mob control, more often than not fixed. As a result, poorly attended. But Blackburn, Roxborough, and Black were determined to shield Louis from all of this, and they set about to create in Louis the polar opposite of Jack Johnson. They would make him into a fighter who would not only dominate inside the ring, but would follow an unimpeachable code of conduct outside. Now, Louis must never strut, must never smile, especially when knocking out white opponents. Unlike Johnson, must never date white women, wear fur coats, drive fast cars, dress extravagantly in any other way, have his teeth capped in gold, must never drink or smoke, whether in or out of the training, must be frugal and religious, work like a racehorse in training, love his mother, keep regular hours, be seen reading the Bible, keep a low profile outside the ring, and behave like a gentleman at all times. Under the strict tutelage of Roxborough, Black, and Blackburn, Joe Louis proved to be a chameleon-like follower of this paradigm. I came to know this Joe Louis through a white comic strip character by the name of Joe Palooka, created, I'm sure, in his image. I followed Palooka's exploits religiously. He was a white, blonde-haired, all-American type professional fighter, wide shoulders, thin waist, faithful black trainer named Sharkey, and a bowling white manager named Walsh. Palooka was a straight arrow, a Boy Scout, never seemed to stray from camp, never broke training, never swore, never smoked, never drank, never hit below the belt or after the bell, and one who showed great concern for his opponents after he had knocked them into dreamland. Joe Palooka also never lost, but he came darn close. Proceeded to take on and knock out a succession of colorful and mostly dirty fighters, all of whom vowed that they would annihilate him, and all of whom came pretty close at one time or another, but never succeeded. I eventually came to realize that Palooka's opponents were modeled after what came to be known as Joe Louis's Bum of the Month Club. As Joe Louis embarked on a career carefully monitored by Roxborough, Black, and Blackburn, he took on a succession of fighters just as Palooka did, starting in Chicago on July 4th, 1934, going on to fight an increasingly ranked set of victims on a monthly basis before sold-out arenas. Madison Square Garden was losing money during 1933 and 1934. In its bouts, many no doubt were fixed, and they were not drawing crowds. At the same time, scouts and matchmakers were beginning to take note of Louis. Among them was Nat Fleischer, who was the editor of that very prestigious magazine called Ring Magazine. And they began to take note of him despite the fact that he was black. Louis now broke into the top 10 contenders for the heavyweight crown. No black fighter had done that since Jack Johnson. The press now began to hint broadly that top contenders were trying to duck Louis. The same press, merely reflecting the atmosphere of the times, remarkably continued to depict Lewis as Mike Jacobs' pet pickaninny. Mike Jacobs was his manager. As a throwback to the primeval savage, the kind of King Kong, a wild thing, tethered by civilization, a wild thing that somehow doesn't belong to civilization. It's hard for us to believe that today. That's the way great sports writers, Bob Considine, Damon Runyon, writing at that time. But Lewis and his explosive knockout had become a major draw. He could fill seats, and his drawing power was now becoming irresistible to fight promoters. Money was scarce in January 35, so New York fight promoter Mike Jacobs, no relation to Joe Jacobs, surfaced for the first time in Lewis' life, phoning him in his dressing room in California after a successful knockout, and offering him a fight with a very high-profile fighter named Primo Carnera. Ah, you may remember him, yeah. It was a major step in New York, major step up for Lewis. Lewis accepted the Carnera fight would not only mark Lewis' entry into the arena of political and racial repercussions, it was a phenomenon that would now follow him for the remainder of his boxing career. Political and racial repercussions. Carnera bout was offered to Lewis just as Jacobs and the Hearst organization had broken with Madison Square Garden. So, together with Damon Runyon, Mike Jacobs had formed something they called the 20th Century Sporting Club. As an inducement to sign with the neophyte 20th Century, Jacobs promised Lewis two things. One, I'll make you heavyweight champion of the world. Number two, more important even, I'll never ask you to throw a fight. That was remarkable in those days. Believe it or not, that was remarkable. When Lewis agreed, Jacobs and the partners would thereafter not only control Lewis, but would reportedly receive half the profits from his fights for the rest of his life. Jacobs immediately scheduled Lewis for a number of fights in the Midwest, starting with 2 in Chicago as warm-ups for Carnera. And Lewis obligingly continued to knock out most opponents in the early round. On his return to Detroit, dutifully made a down payment on a modest house for his mother in a black section of Detroit. Press loved it. Black men knew his place. The gesture did also help to endear him to the black community and solidify his image as the Black Joe Palooka. In May 35, Lewis turned 21. He had knocked out 18 of his professional fighters in 24 pro fights, and he had not yet begun to shave. That same May, 1935, Benito Mussolini was poised, ready to pounce on a relatively defenseless Ethiopia. Ethiopia, successfully governed by Haile Selassie, was a nation revered by the African American community as a model of independent, self-sustaining African nation. Primo Carnera, a 6'7" Italian circus freak, had been transformed by the political winds of the time into the incarnation of the imperialist white man seeking to enslave black Africa. This hulking, bulking, almost 7-foot circus clown was transformed into this image. Joe Louis had already become the symbol of the black men reborn. As Louis arrived in New York, he was carried off the train by a band of Pullman porters. They carried him off the train. The stage was now set for the first Louis fight with ramifications far beyond sportswear. The fight drew 65,000 at Yankee Stadium. Carnera, because of what he'd become to represent through no fault of his own, drew Lewis's wrath. Shortly after the fight began, Lewis opened a wide gash in Carnera's lips, bled profusely thereafter. After that, the outcome was never in doubt. By the time referee Arthur Donovan benevolently called the carnage to a halt in the 6th round, the fans had long since been calling for an end to the fight. Former circus giant was a bloody shambles of his former self. Following the fight, the black community went wild, rejoicing as if black Africa had just vanquished Benito Mussolini and the white imperialists. Poor Primo Carnera had no idea what hit him. Schmeling now realized that sooner or later he was going to have to fight Lewis. And he began to prepare almost scientifically. But something more ominous had now crept into his fight preparation, and it was now coming to define his life. His delirious ravings in Mein Kampf, the psychopathic Adolf Hitler, had extolled boxing as the manly sport of the superior Aryan race. Schmeling, as the premier German fighter at the time, had now become the appointed symbol of that entire demented zeitgeist. Both Mike Jacobs and Joe Jacobs were now angling for a Lewis-Schmeling fight that would undoubtedly draw an enormous gate. Winner would be in line to face heavyweight champion James Braddock, Cinderella Man, with a title. The Nazis were perplexed. They were wrestling with a unique Hobson's choice. On the one hand, they detested the specter of their Ubermensch Schmeling, demeaning himself by entering to the ring with a Mischling, an inferior mixed breed, such as Lewis. Yet they needed the hard currency, which such a bout would no doubt generate. They opted for the money. Preparing for the fight, Lewis continued to devastate opponents, including Max Baer and Kingfish Lewinsky, and Schmeling was installed as an 8-1 underdog. Colorfully given by one journalist, as much of a chance as a silk shirt in the Chinese laundry. The adroit Schmeling was not to be written off quite so quickly. While Lewis, now overconfident from his explosive victories, began to cut corners in his training camp, ignoring repeated admonitions from Chappie Blackburn, the meticulous Schmeling was carefully studying films of Lewis fights, and also coming to attend Lewis fights here. He picked something up. What did he pick up? Well, he picked up the fact that Lewis dangerously dropped his left arm after he threw a left cross, just long enough for Schmeling to cross with his devastating lightning right. The fight generated great excitement around the world. Paid a crowd of 40,000, jammed Yankee Stadium. The celebrities now joined an estimated 60 million listeners overseas. English, German, and Spanish, nationally and internationally. Among them, 3 a.m. German time, was Adolf Hitler in his private railroad car, and Schmeling's wife, Czech star Annie Andra, listening intently at the home of Magda and Joseph Goebbels, whom she visited 4 times since Max left the United States. They were very close to the Nazi hierarchy at that point. In the second round, Schmeling stunned Joe Lewis with a powerful right cross. Exactly that happened. Lewis dropped left cross, and Schmeling crossed to the right. Lewis would say he remembered nothing after that point, but fought out on instinct in round 12 when he was decked and knocked out for the first time in his professional career. International politics and racism now had a stranglehold on boxing in Nazi Germany. Racial antipathies raged here as well. All of Germany erupted in joy. It was 4 a.m. in the morning, but radios blared out open windows in the heat of the summer. Amidst cheering crowds, which are already gathering in the streets, so real were the racial antipathies in this country that sessions in both the House and Senate next day were interrupted by wild celebrations, believe it or not. Letters and telegrams, many from the South, poured into Schmeling's hotel suite, dressing rooms. Father Coughlin, the demagogue radio priest, heard by millions in this country, declared the event, quote, a 1 hour's wonder. As Harlem and the Jewish community went into mourning, Hitler and Goebbels were quick to capitalize on the event. The opportunity was ready-made for the Nazi propaganda machine, wasn't it? Conclusive proof that the superior Aryan race, reborn and nourished by the Third Reich, would prevail over the brute strength and animal cunning of an inferior African mixed breed managed by the Jew, Mike Jacobs, conveniently overlooking the fact that Schmeling was managed by the Jew, Joe Jacobs. Hitler ordered the obedient Max to cancel the steamship reservations on the Brim and return at once by Graf Zeppelin, participate in the glorious celebrations of the Third Reich. This was the year of the Olympics in Berlin. Although all fight films had previously been banned in Germany, Goebbels now had films of this made and shown throughout Germany at all movie theaters in the land, continuously. Schmeling and Annie Andra joined enthusiastically in the celebrations, dutifully ascribing Max's success to the new spirit in Germany generated by the Fuhrer. Prior to the Schmeling fight, Schmeling had not been associated in the United States with stormtroopers, brown shirts, or considered anything but a sports figure. That changed now to celebrations following his 36th victory over Lewis, numerous appearances and photo ops that followed with Hitler, Goering, Goebbels. Schmeling had now crossed the political line. Notwithstanding the continued presence of Joe Jacobs in his entourage and his refusal to join the Nazi Party, Schmeling would henceforth be considered in the United States as a spokesman for the Nazi Party, the very incarnation of Nazism. After the fight, it devastated, injured Lewis, unavailable for interviews, snuck out of Yankee Stadium incognito wearing dark glasses, and ducked out of sight. But over the weeks and months that followed, Schmeling continued to celebrate vast glories. Lewis began a comeback. Joe had begun his quest for a rematch with Max. That elusive rematch would now become Lewis's holy grail. Within the next 8 months, as Schmeling was feted in parades and ceremonies at the Olympics in Germany, was idolized at the Olympics, Lewis fought 11 matches against ranked heavyweights, winning 10 of them by knockouts in 8 months, and the fighting public was now taking note. As the political situation in Europe was heating to a boiling point, there were beginning to be repercussions here in the United States as well. What was going on? Well, the Anti-Nazi League in the United States was already urging a boycott of all Schmeling fights here. With the Olympics over, anti-Semitic activity, of course, had resumed in Germany. It had been stopped during the Olympics, resumed immediately, with a vengeance, and Hitler was becoming more aggressive. Joe Gould, who was Braddock's manager, was now apprehensive about a small gate if Braddock were to fight Schmeling, and he became increasingly evasive over a Schmeling-Braddock fight. Although Schmeling was still the logical contender for the heavyweight crown, having knocked out Joe Louis. Eventually, Hitler got into the act. Hitler wanted to lure a Schmeling-Braddock championship fight to Germany, and through Goebbels, he intervened personally in the negotiations with Gould, offered a significant guarantee of $400,000, secured by advanced deposits in a London bank and a total tax immunity forever, in an attempt to convince Gould to bring his fighter to Berlin. That was a lot of money. Mike Jacobs feared that this was his last chance to secure a heavyweight championship bout for Joe Louis. That if Braddock succumbed to the Nazis' blandishments, and Braddock was well over the hill, quite old by that time for a fighter, Braddock would lose the fight, lose the title of the German in Berlin, and Hitler would never leave the heavyweight championship, leave the country, never leave the country. Mike Jacobs, whose fight Louis was a far greater draw than Braddock, was finally able to schedule a championship fight between Braddock and Louis to be held in Yankee Stadium on June 22, 1937. Intense bargaining. Gould and Braddock fared very well. They had reportedly extracted a commitment from the desperate Mike Jacobs to grant Gould and Braddock 10% of the net profits from Louis for the next 10 years. Braddock, the so-called Cinderella man, a depression victim who at times had been reduced to begging in the streets, was hungry. This was his last chance, and he made the most of it. Well, he figured he had to beat Louis early, because outside of that, he was many, many years younger and could not outlast him. Started out with a flurry of punches and decked Louis in the second round. But Louis got up very quickly. In the 8th round, Louis landed a right hook to the jaw. According to sports writer Bob Considine, Braddock went over stiffly, something wooden and unreal. When the referee counted Braddock out, pronounced Louis the new heavyweight champion of the world, suddenly 42,000 fans were on their feet shouting. On June 22, 1937, America had its first black heavyweight champion since Jack Johnson. Harlem exploded with joy, south in the morning. Notwithstanding the unbridled celebration all around him, Louis insisted he not be called champ until he beat Schmeling. The stage was now set for the rematch, and it was finally arranged on a date exactly 1 year later, on June 22, 1938, Yankee Stadium. Meanwhile, things were heating up internationally. The atmosphere domestically was beginning to undergo something of a metamorphosis. At a Schmeling-Harry Thomas tune-up fight, December 1937, there was a scene of conflicting demonstrations between anti-Nazi boycott groups on one hand and Bundists dressed in stormtrooper uniforms on the other. On April 20th, which is Hitler's birthday, Jewish war veterans were battling Nazi stormtroopers with blackjacks in Yorkville, Manhattan. But the protest against the fight seemed merely to spur ticket sales, which now exceeded 80,000. The films of Schmeling's 8th round KO of Thomas in the interim were now shown throughout Germany and hailed as evidence of continuing Aryan virility. Louis' training routine this time was very much in earnest. His wife Marva was barred from the camp altogether. Now an interesting thing happened. Gene Tunney was notoriously anti-black, and Dempsey too. They showed up at the camp to give Joe pointers. Al felt it was their patriotic duty to do so. Now, Lewis, despite his skin color, was becoming the American standard bearer. And American fighters didn't want to see the heavyweight title leave these shores, certainly not to be German. Lewis hated Schmeling, but for good reason. Following their 36th bout, Schmeling had claimed that Lewis had hit him below the belt on numerous occasions. Lewis was a notoriously clean fighter, never been accused of that before in his career. He was aware that Schmeling had once won the heavyweight championship while lying on the ground in a foul, and he felt that these unsportsmanlike accusations of foul play had become a pattern with Schmeling. Meanwhile, matters on the continent were moving swiftly toward a violent climax. What was happening? In March 1938, Hitler had annexed Austria. He had already occupied the Rhineland and was moving on the Sudetenland. War clouds were now looming in Europe as the British cabinet of Neville Chamberlain had embarked on a policy of appeasement. The day before the fight, Goebbels vowed to a cheering crowd of 120,000 in the Berlin's Olympic Stadium that he would drive the Jews out of Germany. Stormtroopers now roamed the streets of Berlin at will, looting Jewish shopkeepers, beating the owners, urging a boycott of their shops, and threatening those who dared patronize them. Chappie Blackburn now tried to impress upon Joe that the Nazis despised blacks as well, thought of them as inferiors, would do away with them if they could. The message was beginning to get through. Lewis was getting it. Lewis was being brought to a boiling point. He lived and breathed the upcoming Schmeling fight. On the night of the fight, Lewis shadowboxed for 40 minutes in his dressing room instead of his usual 10. As he came out of the dugout, jogged down the baseline to home plate, on his way to the ring, he passed, among other celebrities, Mrs. Evelyn Walsh McLean, sporting the Hope Diamond, J. Edgar Hoover, Thomas Dewey, Fiorello LaGuardia, Joe DiMaggio. He acknowledged no one, headed straight for the corner. During the endless introductions, he was like a racehorse, straining at the bit, ready to bolt out of the starting gate. Schmeling, for the first time, denied the presence of Joe Jacobs in his dressing room. When he was called out, denied even his trainer, who was called away to witness the wrapping of the hands. He was nervous. For the first time in his career, and the only time in his career. He emerged to a cacophony of catcalls, a barrage of cigarette butts, ashtrays, banana peels, and paper cups. Although others had disputed Schmeling's description of the event, there's no question that the tide of public opinion had changed by 1938. Ring announcer Harry Bellow introduced Tony Galento, Jack Sharkey, James Braddock, Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney, I was falling asleep, Tommy Farr, finally Max Baer, who was scheduled to meet the winner. Then he introduced the two fighters who met perfunctorily at the center of the ring for the usual warnings by the referee. Bell finally rang at 10:08 p.m. My eyes were closing under the covers. Surely I'd be asleep before it was over. But in 7 seconds, I was jarred awake. Lewis caught Schmeling with a left jab that hurt. Two more to snap Schmeling's head back. Clem McCarthy was already shouting. Barely 20 seconds had passed. Max's corner man was not even fully down the steps. And there came a deafening roar. In a flash, Lewis had Schmeling against the rope, connecting with a series of devastating blows to the head and the body. So fast that the human eye could not keep up. Then, as my eyes were now wide open, and Lewis hooks a left to Max's head. Quick, shoots a right hand to Max's head. Lewis a left to Max's Joe, a right to the head. Lewis a left, then a right. Landed more blows in this round he's landed in any 5 rounds in the other fight. Then came another right. It was so hard that Schmeling's head seemed to bob up and down like a Halloween apple in a tub. The contest was not yet 30 seconds old. Within the next minute, Lewis had driven a right uppercut, a left, and a devastating right to Schmeling's face, and then as Schmeling twisted toward the ropes, turned away from Lewis, and Lewis let go with a series of body punches. Landed the side, the stomach, the left kidney. Schmeling let out a scream of pain and claimed from that moment on he was paralyzed. The scream was so loud and shrill, it was heard in the far reaches of Yankee Stadium. Punch frightened even referee and veteran Art Donovan, claimed he'd never seen anything like it in his entire career in the ring. 5 punches to the face later, Schmeling was on his knees, hanging on the ropes, German radio announcer at ringside reciting the blow-by-blow, literally in tears, almost unintelligible, shouting, "Max, cover up! For God's sakes, Max, cover up!" Schmeling was already almost semi-conscious. At that point, Goebbels had already ordered the radio waves in Germany jammed. Well, Schmeling was on the ropes. He was not down. Technically, it was not time for a count. Art Donovan, realizing Schmeling was literally out on his feet, waved Lewis off, started the count, fearful that if he didn't, Schmeling might be killed right then and there. Schmeling immediately pulled away, upright. Donovan stopped, count. Lewis advanced, immediately decked Schmeling once more for a count of 4. "Schmeling is up," yelled McCarthy, but just as soon as the words were out of his mouth, Schmeling was down again. McCann, the corner man, wanted it stopped before Schmeling was killed and realized instinctively that Lewis, normally a cool, calculating counterpuncher, at that moment was a man possessed, maniacal, easily capable of killing Schmeling in cold blood before 80,000 screaming fans. Yankee Stadium had been turned into a bloodthirsty Roman arena. McCann threw in the towel. Ordinarily, a sign the fight's over, but they changed the rules. The referee had to stop it. So Donovan defiantly threw the towel back and it hung on the ropes, just like Schmeling himself. Max righted himself and Lewis was about to charge in. McCann, seeing Donovan's reaction, ran into the ring, threw his arms around his fighter. And Donovan shoved McCann aside. It was clear Schmeling was out on his feet. And Donovan started the count again. This time stopped at 5. It was all mercifully over on a TKO. Poor Clem McCarthy, the horse race announcer, still way behind, trying to figure out what had happened. Although the fight had been stopped on a TKO at the count of 5, he continued to count. 6, 7, 8. Finally, the men are in the ring. The men are in the ring. The fight's over. It was a horse race announcer, after all. This had gone by faster than any horse race. Schmeling lay on the canvas, helpless. Took Donovan, McCann, and 2 others, dragged him back to a stool where, after a seeming eternity, he came to and haughtily asked why they weren't still fighting. Later that night, diagnosed with 2 fractured vertebrae, he would spend the next 3 weeks in New York Polyclinic Hospital, visited only by the German consul, refusing a visit even by Lewis. Well, the leaders of the Third Reich quickly disassociated themselves from this event as rapidly as they had embraced Schmeling 2 years earlier. Upon his release from Polyclinic, Schmeling returned to Berlin, this time on the Bremen, not on the Graf Zeppelin, was met only by his wife, and no crowds, no bands, no flags. As Schmeling had been dragged to the corner that night, stands had gone wild. Whites hugged blacks, Jews hugged everybody. For a moment at least, the country had come together after a fashion. Significant to me was the comment of President Jimmy Carter, whose father, Earl Carter's black field workers down in Georgia, yeah, he still had them, had been allowed to listen to the fight on Carter's radio. Then, said Carter, quote, "Our visitors walked silently out of the yard, crossed the road and the railroad tracks, entered the tenant house, and closed the door. Then all hell broke loose and their celebration lasted all night." I was wide awake, visualizing the Nazi Superman being dragged back to his corner in a pool of blood. I realized I hated Schmeling, but not everybody in our community did. I didn't really understand why not. More of that next. I was much too young. There was a chilling ambivalence about Max Schmeling. As the isolationist movement, led by the powerful America First Committee, continued to gain followers in the Midwest, Father Coughlin continued to blare out of the radio every Sunday night. It was still growing Sunday afternoon. It was still growing and remarkably intense. Following, and as aviator hero Charles Lindbergh continued to extol the virtues and the military superiority of the revitalized Aryan race. Little did I understand, the bloody wreck of a man being dragged back to his corner that night in Yankee Stadium was himself a Sphinx-like character. On the one hand, he was a rank opportunist who posed with Hitler, supported him publicly along with other notables in a 1936 referendum, and do Hitler's bidding with the American Olympic Committee. On the other hand, he would steadfastly refuse to join the Nazi Party, never give up his Jewish manager, Joe Jacobs. He would go on to save numerous lives, numerous Jewish lives during the Second World War. Great personal risk to himself. Great personal risk. He hid the 2 sons of his Jewish tailor in his Berlin apartment during and after Kristallnacht, November 22, 1938, credited with saving many more Jews during the war. Nor did I have any idea that the same Schmeling would become wealthy after the war. When in the 1950s, James Farley, formerly a member of the U.S. Olympic Committee, now a director of Coca-Cola, would make sure he was awarded the Coca-Cola franchise from Northern Germany. Norley would live to close to 100 years of age, become one of Lewis's closest friends, helped to support Lewis during Joe's destitute, drug-infested years, and finally, that he would join with Frank Sinatra to pay for Lewis's burial. About as bizarre and admixture of good and evil as history can afford us. As for the United States, it's a transcendent historical moment, albeit a fleeting one for our country. Nevertheless, it was a portent of things to come many decades later, as through a painfully slow evolution, America would move tortuously but relentlessly toward racial equality. At 10:10 p.m. on the night of June 22, 1938, one magical moment in time. All the stereotypes that had dogged Lewis throughout his career were laid aside. The demeaning dialect, which had almost universally characterized Lewis in the press, was conspicuously absent. Lewis, for one shining moment, had been elevated above his skin color. And we celebrated, and he was celebrated, as an American hero. Good had triumphed over evil. A black Luke Skywalker had defeated a white Darth Vader. For one fleeting moment, American apartheid had vanished, and America rejoiced. Maybe Lindbergh and Carell were wrong after all. Maybe the Aryans had feet of clay. Maybe they were not invincible. Maybe they were not a superior race. Maybe, just maybe, they didn't make it. But I didn't comprehend all that. I was only 8. I'd eventually fall asleep that night exhausted, unaware that the 2 Lewis Schmeling fights were about to become an exact metaphor for the international cataclysm that would follow, and which would claim the lives of millions, many of whom, no doubt, sat glued to their portable radios as I did on that very same hot summer night, June 1938. Thank you. Any questions, comments, thoughts, throwing things, whatever? Hi.
There was a Joe Jacobs, Mike Jacobs, there was Jim Jacobs later on that was in the family.
Beats me. I don't know. I just don't know. There may have been.
Yes, there is a Jim Jacobs.
But yeah, there was? Good. What did he do? Was he also a fight manager?
Yeah, he was a fighter.
Right.
For a number of heavies.
Yeah.
He's quite successful.
Very easy to mix these guys up because both their name was Jacobs and they were managing very different fighters. Yes, sir.
I'm always curious, because I can remember the issue over whether they should forgive Joe Lewis's tax indebtedness.
Oh, yeah.
That never, despite everything he did, that never took.
They eventually came to a settlement with him. What happened to poor Joe was that he went on during the war to fight, and instead of, he fought exhibitions before and after the war, and he donated his proceeds of his fights to naval, believe it or not, naval war relief and army war relief and such things as that. And quite frankly, they never gave him full credit for it. And so he wound up with an enormous tax bill. He didn't know how to manage his money, and Mike Jacobs wasn't managing his money very well for him. Not a very nice guy, this Mike Jacobs. And he did wind up in deep, deep debt. I came to know Lewis, oddly enough, at a time when he was punch drunk and a bouncer. Not, he was a greeter, actually, at a casino in Las Vegas, Caesar's Palace. The owners of Caesar's Palace took a liking to Joe Lewis. He was an American hero, but they knew he was punch drunk and totally destitute. And they gave him a job as a greeter out there. And I had started a foundation for him when I was a young lawyer. I was called on to do that. It was a great experience. Someday I'll tell you about it. We had a lot of fun. Hi, yeah. Yes, sir. I'm going to speak up, it's a little difficult. I don't, do we have one of those
You may
mics?
have to read, we don't, you may have to repeat the question.
Okay, so I'll have to repeat the question, because you don't seem to have one of those hand mics.
After Lewis got out of the services and donated all this money that he earned when he was doing all these benefits,
Yeah.
the government passed up every single opportunity to help him out. They always ruled against him, and when Schmeling got the Coca-Cola distributorship, Lewis had also applied for it. And they gave one to Schmeling, but they did not give one to Lewis.
Well, you know, I didn't know that. It's an interesting fact. I've never read about that Lewis had applied for a Coca-Cola distributorship. But it was Farley that befriended Schmeling. And Schmeling had approached him in 1936, and he was on the Olympic Committee. Yeah. Can you folks hear there in Great Barrington? I don't know if we can get it.
No.
The question that preceded this, the question that this was about was whether Lewis was ever offered a Coca-Cola franchise. The gentleman thinks he was. I don't know that I didn't know that he was. Yes.
Yeah, Lewis was noted for the swiftness of his hands and his feet.
Yeah.
What most people don't know is that his eyes were also very swift.
His eyes.
He could read the label on a 78 record
RPM.
while he was going.
Yeah. This gentleman points out that not only was Lewis sharp with his fast with his hands and his feet, but also with his eyes, and that when a 78 RPM record was going around, he could read the label. That's because he could have played baseball, maybe he could have hit some of these 104 mile an hour pitchers. Yeah, right, yeah.
Each lecture series, are you going to be introducing different athletes?
No, not. Only in the third, I'm going to talk about baseball as a phenomenon, and I'll be talking about some individual athletes there. But next week, it's going to be, and outside of that, not athletes. It's as far from athletics as you can possibly.
There is a syllabus handout, and you
There's a
did.
syllabus of that.
Yes, I have.
The question is, will I be talking about athletes at all of the 6 talks? The answer is no. Pardon me? Oh, they have a question, yeah.
Any questions from Great Barrington?
Well, let me just answer this one.
You just call
I will
out.
not be talking about athletes except for the
David?
third.
David, can you hear him?
Baseball, and it's really going to be about the phenomenon of radio and its effect on the psyche of communities. But it will be about baseball.
David, can you hear from here? Yes. David, this is Don Shapiro in Great Barrington.
Hi, Don.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
I'm a little bit younger than you are, so my first memory of Joe Louis was when he came back from the service in '46, I think, and fought Billy Conn for the second
Great
time.
fight.
And
Absolutely.
I think he had beaten Billy Conn before he went into the service in '41 or '42, and then finally lost the title to Jersey Joe Walcott. But he was still considered a real hero in America at that time.
Absolutely, he was. Yeah, I remember that, Don. That's great. I remember that Conn fight. That I listened to, and I was able to stay awake the whole time for that one. And that was a great fight. And Billy Conn, who was an enormous underdog in that fight, no one thought he could come anywhere near it. But he was a very smart fighter, and he lasted in the 13th round, was way ahead on points in the 13th round, and then he got careless. If I remember correctly, Don, he got careless in about the 13th round, and that's when Lewis got him and knocked him out. But you're absolutely right. That was a very exciting fight.
But Lewis was still making a lot of money then, in those
Yes, he
days.
was making money. He was also spending a lot of money and losing a lot of money. Didn't have financial advisors. Donnie could have used you at that time.
Yeah, right.
Do you know whether we had a team, a boxing team at the Olympics in '36?
Oh, we did.
In other words, was there-
I'm pretty sure we
was
did. Yes,
boxing-
I'm almost positive we did. 'Cause we
They
had
would have been
we had a full
amateurs.
team there, and that was a great Jesse Owens. What?
They would have been amateurs, so Lewis.
Oh, yeah. They would have. No, Lewis would not have fought. But that was the Jesse Owens Olympics. The Olympics that Jesse Owens won. Yes, sir. There's one over here in the back.
Wasn't Browning's manager Jewish? Or
Yeah.
if that's true,
Yeah.
wouldn't that have affected the negotiation, Lewis versus Schmeling? dealing with the German
Oh,
government?
yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a famous article in the New York papers to the effect that he really talked back to Goebbels about that, and on the phone. That's Joe Gould. And he really moved it in the direction that it went. But I've got to tell you, money was a tremendous motivating factor. And Braddock came out very, very well on it. I mean, this was his last shot, and he made the most out of it. Yes, sir. The question there was whether Jimmy Braddock's manager was Jewish, and the answer is yes, his name was Gould. Yes. Do you have another question? You had your hand up. Oh, okay. Just scratch me. Okay.
He can't see you usually.
Anybody else's hand up? Okay, how about Greg Barrington?
All right.
Yes.
I have a question. It's not a question, it's about Joe Louis.
Right.
Joe Louis fought so many fighters that one day he was asked what his thoughts were about Adlai Stevenson. He thought him in and he says, "Great right hook, I'd sure like to fight him again."
I love it. Wonderful. Great. On that note, I think we'll close. We'll see you all next week.